6 engineers stood in the private garage of Marsh Automotive, their faces drawn tight under the fluorescent lights. Vivian Marsh watched them shake their heads one by one as her father's 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO sat silent on the lift. The engine had sputtered its last breath 3 days ago, and every specialist in the country had failed to revive it. This was the car her father had driven on the day he proposed to her mother. The car that held 40 years of family legacy in its elegant curves and hand-stitched leather seats. The board of directors needed her to present it at Pebble Beach in 2 weeks, or they would vote to sell the company her father had spent his life building. Vivienne pressed her palm against the cold hood and whispered to no one in particular. There must be someone who can fix her. Behind her, Rosa, the family's longtime housekeeper, pressed a worn business card into her hand. Hargrove Auto Works. We fix what others can't. 6 certified engineers walked away from that Ferrari, and a housekeeper handed her a business card for a small-town mechanic nobody's heard of. What does this man know that 6 specialists missed? Drop your guess in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The address on the card took Vivienne 40 minutes outside Charlotte, past strip malls and auto parts stores, and into a neighborhood where the houses had chain-link fences and the lawns needed mowing. She pulled her black Mercedes to a stop in front of a cinder block building with 2 garage bays and a hand-painted sign that read Hargrove Auto Works in faded blue letters. A rusted vending machine hummed near the entrance. She looked at it. She looked at the sign. She looked at the cracked concrete apron in front of the bays. This could not be the place. Inside the first bay, a pair of legs in oil-stained jeans extended from beneath a 1970 Chevelle with primer gray panels and a missing rear bumper. A little girl sat cross-legged on a blue plastic milk crate nearby, a picture book about vintage automobiles open in her lap. Her hair was pulled back in 2 uneven pigtails, and she wore a pink t-shirt that said Future Engineer in glittery letters. She looked up at Vivian with brown eyes that seemed far too observant for a child her age. Are you here to get your car fixed? Vivian looked around the cluttered space, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with whatever fragile hope had brought her here. The tools were old but meticulously organized. Every wrench and socket sat in its designated spot. Engine parts lined metal shelves along the back wall, labeled with masking tape and black marker. A calendar from several years prior still hung near the register, frozen in time. I need someone who actually knows what they're doing, Vivian said. She heard the words leave her mouth and immediately recognized the edge in them sharper than she'd intended, carrying something beneath the surface that she wasn't proud of. She was too proud to take them back. The legs slid out from under the Chevelle on a wheeled creeper. Cole Hargrove stood up slowly, unfolding to his full height, wiping his hands on a red shop rag that had seen better days. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and forearms built from years of physical work. His face had the weathered quality of someone who had seen real trouble and come out the other side not unscathed, but standing. His eyes assessed Vivian without judgment, without the fawning recognition she usually received when people realized who she was. What kind of car? His voice was low and measured. A Ferrari, Vivian said. A 250 GTO, 1962. Cole went completely still. That was the kind of car that belonged in museums and private collections, not in the service bays of small-town garages in North Carolina. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't whistle. He asked a question. What's wrong with it? That's the problem, Vivian replied. No one can figure it out. The engine misfires intermittently. The timing seems off, but inconsistently. Every mechanic and engineer who's examined it says something different. She watched his face for the hunger she usually saw when people grasped the full scope of the situation before them. The scale of the car, the scale of the money involved, the scale of her desperation. Instead, Cole asked more questions. When did it start? Was there anything unusual before the first misfire? How does it sound when you turn the key? Does it idle rough from the start or cut out after it warms up? Has anyone traced the fuel delivery system from the tank forward? Vivienne found herself answering in detail, surprised to discover that he was asking things none of the other engineers had thought to ask. They had all wanted to connect the car to diagnostic computers, replace parts wholesale, approach the problem like a software update. Cole was asking about the car's behavior, its personality, as if it were a patient describing symptoms, and he was the first doctor willing to actually listen. "Daddy fixed a car once that even the museum people couldn't fix," the little girl announced proudly from her milk crate. It was a 1936 Duesenberg, and they said it would never run again. But Daddy listened to it for 3 whole days, and then he knew exactly what was wrong. Vivienne looked at her properly for the first time. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl said. "I'm 9 years old." She held up 9 fingers for emphasis. Cole put his hand on Lily's shoulder, a gesture both protective and proud. "I appreciate you coming all the way out here," he said to Vivienne, his tone polite but final. "But I don't work on cars like that anymore." Vivienne felt the rejection like a door closing in her face. "Why not?" Cole didn't answer. He simply turned back toward the Chevelle, dismissing her completely. She opened her mouth to press her case, and then Lily started coughing. It began small, just a catch in the throat, but quickly escalated into a wheeze that made the girl's thin chest heave with effort. Her face went pale, then flushed. Her eyes widened with the particular fear of someone who cannot get enough air. Cole moved instantly. All his composure vanished. He pulled an inhaler from his back pocket with the practiced speed of someone who had done this hundreds of times before, kneeling beside his daughter, coaching her through the dose with a steady, quiet voice. "Breathe slow, sweetheart. That's it. Nice and easy. Hold it in. Good girl. Just like we practiced." Vivienne stood and watched him hold Lily against his chest, his calloused hands impossibly gentle on her narrow back. The fear in his eyes was raw and absolute, the kind of terror that only parents fully understand. After a long moment, Lily's breathing steadied. The color returned to her cheeks. "I'm okay, Daddy. I just forgot to breathe slow like you said." He kissed her forehead, his eyes still bright with residual fear. "I know you are, baby. I know." When Cole finally stood, Vivienne noticed what she had somehow missed before. A photograph on the wall behind the register. A younger version of Cole, maybe a decade younger, clean-shaven, bright-eyed, wearing a red uniform with a prancing horse logo on the chest. He stood beside a racing car, grinning with the confident joy of a man who had found his exact purpose in the world. The Ferrari logo was unmistakable. She said it quietly. "You used to work for Ferrari." Cole's jaw tightened. The transformation was immediate and complete, as if a wall had slammed down behind his eyes. "That was a long time ago," he said. "A different life." His voice carried a warning Vivienne registered clearly. But as she walked back to her Mercedes, her heels crunching on the gravel, she already knew she was not done with Cole Hargrove. She spent the next 2 days making calls from her corner office at Marsh Precision Automotive's headquarters. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for, though she almost wished it had. Cole Hargrove had been a rising star in the automotive engineering world. He had started at a prestigious Detroit firm fresh out of school and risen through the ranks with an almost unnatural speed, earning a reputation as someone who could diagnose problems that stumped entire teams of specialists. The older mechanics called him precise, not a word used lightly in that world. Then, 5 years ago, everything had fallen apart. He had been accused of stealing proprietary engine design data and passing it to a competitor. The charges had made the industry rounds quickly. His employer at the time had terminated him immediately. The investigation had dragged on for the better part of a year before being quietly closed for lack of evidence. But by then, the damage was complete. His name had become synonymous with betrayal in an industry built almost entirely on trust. No one in the automotive world would touch him. He had returned to Charlotte with nothing but his daughter and his tools, opened a garage in a neighborhood where no one knew his history, and quietly began again. Vivienne drove back to Hargrove Auto Works on a Thursday morning. Lily was at school. Cole was alone in the first bay, bent over the engine of an old Ford pickup, rust blooming along its wheel wells. He looked up when her shadow crossed the hood. She saw resignation in his eyes. He had been expecting her to come back. "You're back. I know what happened to you," Vivian said. "I know about the accusations and the investigation. I know the case was closed without a conviction." Cole straightened slowly, his expression guarded but not hostile. He seemed almost relieved that the pretense was behind them. "Then you know why I said no." "I know what they accused you of," Vivian said carefully. "I also know the charges were dropped. No evidence, no conviction. That doesn't matter." Cole's voice was flat. "People believe what they want to believe. Once your name gets attached to something like that, the truth becomes almost irrelevant." Vivian stepped closer. "I don't care what they said you did. I don't care what the industry whispers when your name comes up. I care about one thing. Can you fix my car?" Cole studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Why does this car matter so much to you?" "Because it was my father's." Vivienne heard her own voice crack. "He died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He fought it for 18 months and lost. That car is the last piece of him I have. The board of directors wants to sell everything he built. If I can't prove that Marsh still has a soul, they'll tear apart everything he spent his life creating." Something shifted in Cole's expression. Understanding, or the recognition of a grief that mirrored his own. "I'll pay you triple your normal rate," Vivian continued. "Whatever you want. But more than that, I will provide full health insurance for you and Lily for 5 years. The best coverage money can buy." She paused. "Her medications are expensive, Mr. Hargrove. And they're going to get more expensive as she grows. I've done the research." Cole's jaw tightened at the mention of Lily. He was quiet for a very long time. His hands flexed at his sides, wrestling with pride and practicality in equal measure. "I work alone," he said finally. "No one looks over my shoulder. Your engineers, your consultants, they stay away from my garage. Done. And if I can't fix it, I'll say so plainly. Something tells me you can." The Ferrari arrived 2 days later on a flatbed truck. Cole directed the driver to lower it carefully into the second bay, then stood back and simply looked at it. The car was breathtaking even in its broken state. The cherry-red paint had been hand-polished for 6 decades. Chrome trim caught every stray beam of afternoon light filtering through the high windows. He walked around it slowly, running his fingers along the curves of the fenders with the unhurried reverence of someone approaching something genuinely sacred. When he reached the front, he placed both palms flat on the hood and closed his eyes. Vivian watched from the doorway, uncertain what she was witnessing. Cole remained that way for nearly a minute, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. "She's been trying to tell someone what's wrong for a long time," he said softly. Nobody stopped long enough to listen. For the first time in weeks, Vivian felt something she had almost forgotten how to recognize. It settled in her chest quietly, without fanfare. It felt like hope. The days fell into a rhythm. Cole worked on the Ferrari from dawn until Lily's school bus dropped her off each afternoon, then broke to help with homework and make dinner before returning to the garage after she went to bed. Vivian found reasons to stop by nearly every day. She told herself she was checking on her investment, monitoring progress, but the truth was more complicated. There was something about watching Cole work that she couldn't look away from. His concentration was absolute. His movements were precise and unhurried. He talked to the car while he worked, murmuring observations and theories in a voice too low for her to hear across the bay. On the third day, Lily had one of her episodes. It was milder than the one Vivian had witnessed at their first meeting, but still, frightening to watch the sudden interruption of normal breathing, the way Cole's entire posture changed the instant he heard the sound. He was beside her in seconds, inhaler in hand, voice calm and even. Vivian stood near the garage door and watched, and something in her chest pulled in a direction she hadn't expected. On the fourth day, Cole found the problem. He called Vivienne over to the open engine bay and pointed to a section of the fuel delivery system, a maze of vintage components that had been carefully maintained for decades but never fully modernized. Everyone who looked at this car focused on what had been added, he said. The electronic sensors, the updated ignition system. They were looking for a modern failure in a car that's been running on original equipment for 60 years. He indicated a small component near the fuel bowl. There's a microscopic fracture here. It only opens up when the engine reaches full operating temperature and the metal expands. At normal diagnostic temperatures, it doesn't exist. I had to wait for the right conditions to appear, and that took 3 days. Vivienne stared at the tiny fissure, barely visible even now that he was pointing directly at it. They were all too busy trying to fix what they assumed was broken, Cole said. Meanwhile, the car was right here telling anyone who was patient enough to wait. Vivienne stood over that hairline crack and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel at work. She felt humbled. Meanwhile, Lily had taken a liking to Vivienne in the uncomplicated, direct way that children sometimes do. She would sit beside her while Cole worked, showing her a collection of car photographs cut from old magazines and arranged in a battered photo album. "Daddy says every car has a story," Lily explained one afternoon. "Some stories are happy and some are sad, but they're all worth knowing." She looked up. "What's your car's story?" Vivienne found herself telling Lily about her father, how he had started Marsh Precision in a rented warehouse with almost nothing, how he had driven that very Ferrari on his first date with her mother, how he had pulled over on a scenic overlook 3 months later and proposed while the engine idled behind them, how he used to take Vivienne for Sunday drives when she was not much older than Lily, teaching her the name of every part under the hood. He was a man who expressed himself more clearly in mechanical language than in any other. "He sounds really kind," Lily said. He was. He was the best man I ever knew. He just never quite learned how to say what he felt out loud." Vivienne paused, but he always found another way. Everything shifted when Gerald Fitch came to see her. Fitch was Marsh Precision's CFO, a man who had been with the company for over 20 years, who now sat on the board with a significant block of voting shares and a long memory for every favor ever owed to him. He appeared at Vivienne's office on a Tuesday afternoon without an appointment. Silver hair perfectly combed, Italian suit impeccable, his smile never quite reaching his gray eyes. "I hear you've hired an interesting consultant for the Ferrari project." His voice was pleasant. There was something predatory underneath it. Vivienne kept her expression carefully neutral. "His name is Cole Hargrove. He's a mechanic." Fitch's smile widened. "He's also a disgraced engineer who was fired over a theft investigation and spent nearly a year under formal accusation. The board will not be pleased when they learn you've given him access to your father's car. That's between me and the board." Fitch leaned forward slightly. "I'm trying to help you, Vivienne. Your father trusted me for 20 years. Trust me now. Get rid of this man before he embarrasses you. Before he embarrasses the company." After Fitch left, Vivienne sat alone in her office for a long time, watching the sun move across the Charlotte skyline. Then, she picked up her phone and made a call to a private investigator she'd worked with once before. If Gerald Fitch was this concerned about Cole Hargrove, there was more to the story than anyone had told her. That night, Cole noticed that his toolbox had been gone through. Small things were off a wrench, placed in the wrong drawer, a diagnostic cable coiled in the opposite direction from where he always left it. Someone had been inside his garage. Someone had gone through his things carefully enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. Cole noticed. He didn't mention it to Vivienne. She found him on a rainy Tuesday evening, the garage lit only by the work lights angled over the Ferrari's open engine bay. Rain drummed steadily on the metal roof and ran in thin streams down the small windows. "Richard Brennan came to see me today," Vivienne said. "He's my head of engineering. Been with the company almost as long as Fitch." She paused. "He told me about the investigation 5 years ago, the designs you supposedly stole." The way your career ended overnight. Cole's hands stilled on the wrench. He set it down carefully. He moved to the workbench along the back wall and leaned against it with his arms crossed over his chest. Supposedly, he said. That's an interesting word. Tell me what actually happened. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he began, his voice was flat and clinical, as if describing events that had happened to someone else. 5 years ago, I was working on a hybrid propulsion concept. Not an improvement on existing technology, something genuinely new. A way of integrating electric and combustion systems that would have changed the efficiency numbers across the entire industry. A colleague named David Reiser saw an opportunity. He had connections I didn't have. People who would pay for that kind of work. When the design surfaced at a competitor 6 months later, someone had to take the blame. Reiser had political cover. His family had been in the industry for 3 generations. I was the new one, the outsider. The one who had risen fast enough to make people uncomfortable. Vivienne listened without moving. The night I was arrested, Cole continued, his voice dropping, my wife packed a bag. Sarah and I had been having problems already, the long hours, the pressure, the way everything had narrowed down to work. I thought we were managing it. She said she couldn't raise Lily with a criminal for a father. She left before I even made bail. Filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He paused. The charges were eventually dropped, not enough evidence to prosecute, but by then it didn't matter. My reputation was gone. My marriage was over. I took Lily and came home. I'm sorry, Vivienne said. I stopped fighting because I had a daughter who needed me more than I needed my career back. He met her eyes for the first time since he'd started speaking. The garage isn't what I planned, but Lily knows where I am every afternoon when she gets off the bus, and that counts for more than I can explain. Vivienne thought about her own boardroom, the men twice her age who questioned every decision she made, the constant whispered implication that she had her position because of her last name rather than anything she had earned. My father used to say that the engine doesn't lie, she said quietly. People lie. Lawyers lie. Executives lie. But the engine just does what it does. The truth is always in the mechanics. Cole looked at her directly. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, or the beginning of one. 2 people who had been broken by different versions of the same world and were still quietly trying to put themselves back together. Your father sounds like someone I would have liked, Cole said, and the corner of his mouth lifted barely, briefly, but there. Her phone buzzed before she could respond. An email from the board, sent by Gerald Fitch. An emergency meeting had been called for Thursday morning. The subject line read, Personnel concerns. What is it? Cole asked. Fitch just sent documentation to the entire board. Employment records. The investigation file. News articles. She looked up from the screen. He's calling for an emergency vote to terminate your contract. Cole nodded slowly. He had been expecting something like this. You should let me go, he said quietly. It's the smart move. Save your position, protect the company. I have never made the smart move in my entire life, Vivienne said. But even as she spoke, she felt the full weight of what she was walking toward. The board met in fewer than 48 hours. If she didn't let Cole go, she would likely lose everything her father had built. And if she did let him go, she would save the company at the cost of something she couldn't fully name yet but already understood mattered. She drove to the garage at 11 o'clock on Wednesday night, her mind still churning through an equation that had no clean solution. She had spent the entire day in meetings, reviewing documents, consulting with 2 different attorneys. The math was brutally simple: her company or her conscience, her father's legacy or one man's dignity. She knew what her father would have wanted her to do. She wasn't yet sure she was strong enough to do it. The garage door was unlocked. Inside, the work lights cast warm pools of gold across the concrete floor, and she heard something she hadn't expected: laughter. She followed the sound and found Cole and Lily sitting together on the floor beside the Ferrari. Lily had a stethoscope pressed against the engine block, and Cole was guiding her small hand from one point on the metal surface to another. "Hear that?" he said. "That's the fuel pump. It makes a kind of worrying sound, very rhythmic. And that deeper one, a little lower, that's the alternator. They have different voices, like instruments in an orchestra." Lily closed her eyes, concentrating. "The fuel pump sounds like someone humming," she said after a moment, "like you do when you're working. And the alternator sounds like someone thinking." Cole laughed, a full, genuine sound that transformed his face completely. The weariness fell away, and for just a moment Vivienne could see clearly who he must have been before everything went wrong. He pulled Lily into a hug. "That's exactly right," he said. "You have better ears than half the engineers I ever worked with." Vivienne stood frozen in the doorway. This was what she had come here to end. Not just a work arrangement, but this moment. This father and his daughter finding something uncomplicated and joyful together in a world that had given them plenty of the opposite. Cole looked up. His expression read her face immediately. "They gave you an ultimatum," he said. She stepped forward into the light. "I came here tonight with a speech prepared. I was going to tell you that I don't have a choice, that the board is forcing my hand, that I'm sorry." She looked at Lily, still holding the stethoscope, watching them both with the careful attention of a child who understands more than adults assume. "And then I walked in and saw you two, and I realized something. My father didn't build this company by cutting corners or betraying people. He built something real, and he did it the right way. I won't save his company by becoming everything he taught me to despise." Cole was very still. "Vivienne, you'll lose everything. Probably," she said, "but I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. And I'll still be able to visit his grave and tell him that when it actually mattered, I did the right thing." She held his gaze. "You stay. We finish the car. Whatever comes after that, we face it." Before Cole could respond, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed in an instant, a different kind of still, the kind that comes before bad news. It was the hospital, Lily's pediatrician. Something was wrong with her latest blood work and respiratory readings. They needed to come in right away. The next 6 hours were fluorescent lights and antiseptic and beeping machines and plastic chairs and forms that had to be filled out with hands that weren't entirely steady. Lily had suffered a severe asthma event at school that afternoon, far worse than the episodes Cole normally managed. Her oxygen levels had dropped dangerously before the school nurse could intervene. She was stable now, the doctors said carefully, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Cole filled out insurance forms and talked in low voices with administrators about coverage limits, while Vivienne sat in the chair beside Lily's bed. She hadn't asked permission to be there. She simply stayed. When Lily woke around 3 in the morning, confused and frightened, reaching out in the dimness, it was Vivienne's hand she found. "Miss Vivienne, am I okay?" "I'm right here, sweetheart. Your daddy's just down the hall talking to the doctors. He'll be back in a few minutes." Lily's eyes fluttered. "You smell like flowers," she murmured. "Like my mama used to smell." Before she went away, Vivienne's throat tightened. "Go back to sleep, honey. I'm not going anywhere." When Cole returned 20 minutes later, he found them like that Vivienne in the plastic chair, her hand still wrapped around his daughter's fingers, Lily sleeping peacefully. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Something in his chest, that he had kept carefully locked for 5 years, cracked open, quietly, without drama, the way things sometimes give way when they've held on long enough. Lily came home from the hospital 2 days later, armed with a new inhaler, 3 prescriptions, and instructions to rest. The board meeting had been postponed. Vivienne had invoked a family emergency clause in the company charter, buying them time. Cole went back to work on the Ferrari with a focused intensity that pushed everything else to the edges. Vivienne spent her nights digging through archived company files, following a trail that the private investigator had helped her locate. She found it buried in a folder of emails from 7 years ago, correspondence between Gerald Fitch and a technology acquisition broker in Munich. Discussions about proprietary automotive engineering designs. Specific references to a young engineer who was getting dangerously close to a breakthrough that certain parties had already arranged to acquire through other channels. The dates matched Cole's time at the Detroit firm precisely. The technical specifications described matched the hybrid system Cole had designed, detail for detail. Fitch had not simply benefited from Cole's downfall, he had engineered it, arranged the theft through intermediaries, ensured that Cole would absorb the blame, and collected the proceeds from behind a wall of deniable distance. And now, 5 years later, he was attempting to do exactly the same thing to Vivienne. She confronted him in his corner office the following morning, the printed evidence arranged across his mahogany desk. Fitch didn't bother to deny any of it. He leaned back in his leather chair with the composure of a man who had weathered worse. "Your father was sentimental," he said. "He built a beautiful company and then refused to protect it the way a company actually needs to be protected. That's why he's gone and I'm still here." He let the implication settle. "Sell me your shares quietly, or I'll bury you the same way I buried that mechanic." Vivienne reached into her blazer pocket and pressed stop on her phone's voice recorder. "I think I'll take option 3, she said. She walked out before he could find his voice. That night, Cole completed his work on the Ferrari. He ran every diagnostic twice, confirmed every connection, checked his notes against the original factory specifications, and finally turned the key in the ignition. The engine came to life with a sound that was not just mechanical, it was something more than mechanical, a voice that had been silent for too long, suddenly full and present and alive. Vivienne stood beside the car and felt the tears come before she could stop them. It sounded exactly right. It sounded like something her father would have recognized. But Cole had also found something else. While working on the dashboard wiring, he had discovered a hidden compartment behind the glove box, small, carefully concealed, lined with aged felt. Inside was an envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in her father's handwriting. "To my daughter, when she needs it most." Cole brought it to her without opening it. "This was hidden in the car," he said gently. "I think it's been waiting for you." Vivienne's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter inside was dated 2 months before her father's death. He had known he was dying when he wrote it. He had finally written the things he had never been able to say out loud, how proud he was of her strength, how sorry he was for the years of emotional distance, how he knew she would face tests that would push her to her limit, and how completely and absolutely he believed she would rise to meet them. "Take care of my girl," the letter ended. "Not the car, not the company. You, because you, my darling, were always the real thing I built." Vivienne wept in the garage until there were no tears left. When she finally looked up, Cole was there, patient, steady, without any effort to fill the silence with anything other than his presence. They drove through the night, Vivienne behind the wheel of the Ferrari and Cole in the passenger seat, heading west toward Pebble Beach as the stars turned overhead. The car ran like something restored, not just mechanically but in some deeper sense. Rosa followed in Vivienne's SUV with Lily asleep in the back seat, clutching a stuffed rabbit she had named after her favorite racing driver. They stopped once for coffee at a diner in New Mexico, and Cole bought Lily a postcard of the desert sunrise to add to her collection. Vivienne watched them together, the easy, unguarded affection between father and daughter, and felt something settle in her chest like a key finding its tumbler. Dawn was breaking over the Pacific Coast Highway when they reached Monterey, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflected off the water below. The Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance was already alive with activity despite the early hour. Hundreds of the world's most extraordinary automobiles were arranged across the legendary 18th fairway, their chrome and bodywork catching the morning light. Collectors and enthusiasts moved between the displays, speaking in hushed, reverent voices about provenance and restoration and the particular kind of love it takes to preserve beautiful things. Vivienne guided the Ferrari to its designated spot. Near the judge's tent, she could already see Gerald Fitch in conversation with two board members, composed and confident, unaware of what was coming. The morning passed in inspections and technical interviews and questions from experts who marveled at the car's condition, its sound, its presence, the obvious devotion that had gone into bringing it back. When they asked who had done the mechanical work, Vivienne didn't hesitate. "This car was saved by a man named Cole Hargrove," she said, her voice carrying. "Some of you may recognize that name. 5 years ago, he was one of the most gifted engineers in this industry. And then this industry tried to destroy him for something he didn't do." She paused. "Let me tell you exactly what happened." What followed was a careful, documented dismantling of 5 years of deliberate lies. Email by email, date by date, Vivienne laid out what she had found, the correspondence between Fitch and the acquisition broker in Munich, the financial trail, the timeline that proved Cole had been framed, while the real architects of the theft walked away untouched. She named names, she cited dates, she provided documentation that would stand in any courtroom. The crowd went completely silent. Cameras flashed. Reporters typed quickly on their phones. The story was too real, too precisely documented, too long overdue not to follow wherever it led. Fitch tried to move toward the back of the crowd, his face pale. Security personnel Vivienne had positioned earlier that morning were waiting at every exit. Across the fairway, near the edge of the gathered audience, a man in a well-cut suit had gone very still. David Reiser, Cole's former colleague, now holding a senior position at another firm, listening to his own history being read aloud in the California morning sun. 2 men in dark suits approached him from either side. They had questions of their own. The rest of the day unfolded with the particular surreal quality of long overdue justice arriving all at once. Fitch was escorted away, his composure finally giving out in the middle of a parking lot where people he'd worked beside for decades watched without moving to help him. The board of directors in Charlotte, watching the live stream from their conference room, voted unanimously to remove him from his position and to affirm Vivienne's leadership without condition. A senior executive from the automotive firm that had originally employed Cole approached him personally. He offered a formal public apology on behalf of the company, immediate reinstatement at whatever position Cole chose, and a financial settlement that would secure his daughter's future completely. Cole listened to the entire offer without interrupting. Then he shook his head. "I appreciate it," he said. "I genuinely do. But I have a garage to run back in Charlotte, and I have a daughter who needs her father home for dinner every night. That means more to me than anything you're describing." He glanced at Vivienne. "I might consider some consulting work, though, if the right partner were to ask." That evening, as the sun went down over Carmel Bay in shades of orange and deep rose, Vivienne found Cole standing at the edge of the fairway. The Ferrari gleamed behind them, a first-place ribbon on its hood, the crowds thinning in the cooling air. "You could have had everything back today," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Your reputation, your career, everything they took from you on their terms and in front of everyone who watched it happen." Cole turned to look at her, and his face was calm and open in a way she hadn't seen before, something in him finally resting after a very long time. "I already have everything back," he said. He looked toward the parking lot, where Lily was pressing her face against the window of Rosa's SUV, waving with enormous enthusiasm, her grin visible from 50 yards away. "And some things I never had before." He looked back at Vivienne. His expression was warm and vulnerable and quietly hopeful, the way someone looks when they're not sure they've earned what's in front of them but have decided to reach for it anyway. "Thank you," he said, "for believing me when it would have been so much easier not to." Vivienne smiled. "My father always said the engine doesn't lie. I just finally learned how to listen." The drive back to Charlotte took 2 days. They stopped at roadside diners and scenic overlooks and one roadside attraction that Lily spotted from the highway and absolutely refused to pass without investigating. They let her pick the music and the restaurants, and what could have been an exhausting return journey became something that felt, unexpectedly, like something else entirely. Rosa followed behind in the SUV and pretended not to notice how often Cole and Vivienne found reasons to stand close together, to pass coffee cups with hands that lingered, to share private smiles that required no translation. 6 months later, Hargrove Auto Works looked different. The cinder block building had been renovated, its 2 bays expanded to 4, its equipment updated to handle restoration work from collectors across the country. A new sign hung above the entrance: Hargrove and Marsh Restorations. The partnership had been made official 3 months after Pebble Beach. Lily was thriving. The new insurance coverage had connected her with specialists who adjusted her treatment plan, and she had gone 4 months without a serious episode. She still sat at her folding table in the garage after school each afternoon, but now she was helping learning to identify engine sounds by ear with an accuracy that made her father look at her sometimes with something close to awe. On a Sunday afternoon in October, the 3 of them sat together on the hood of the Ferrari in the parking lot, watching the autumn leaves drift down across the pavement. Lily was drawing in her sketchbook, capturing the car in careful pencil lines, adding detail with the patience of someone who has learned to wait for the right conditions. "I think my father would have liked you," Vivienne said quietly. Cole smiled. "I think I would have liked him too." Lily looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, can Miss Vivienne come to my birthday party next week?" Cole and Vivienne's eyes met. Something passed between them, unspoken, unhurried, entirely understood. "I think," Cole said slowly, "that Miss Vivienne might be around for a lot more than just birthday parties." Lily's face lit up. She turned back to her drawing and added a small figure beside the car that had not been there before, penciling it in with the careful certainty of someone recording something true. The afternoon light fell across the parking lot in long golden lines. The Ferrari sat gleaming in the middle of it, fixed and present and whole, and for a long moment no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of the road and the quiet rustle of leaves and the particular contentment of people who have found, after a long time looking, exactly where they belong. Some engines break down because they are old, some break down because they have been neglected, but the ones worth saving just need someone patient enough to listen and brave enough to believe they can run again.